Good evening. I am Steve Cohn, former Sacramento City Council member. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the next segment, the Forum on Sacramento County's Measure A, sponsored by the National Women's Political Caucus of Sacramento. As you may know, Measure A will appear on your November ballot as the Sacramento County Transportation Maintenance, Safety, and Congestion Relief Act of 2022. That's quite a mouthful. Measure A proposes an $8.5 billion transportation tax, which would fund dozens of transportation projects in the county and raise the county sales tax by 0.5% for the next 40 years, which comes out to a little over $200 million annually for transportation projects. So as moderator for this forum, it's important to note I am neutral on Measure A, but we are fortunate to have two speakers tonight who are well-qualified advocates for the pro and con positions. Speaking in support of Measure A is Andy Russell, Director of Government Affairs for the California Alliance for Jobs. Speaking in opposition is Barbara Leary, chair of the Sacramento Sierra Club. Tonight's format is as follows. First, each speaker will have 3 minutes to make their opening statement. Second, each speaker will have 1 minute to answer a prepared series of questions regarding Measure A in rotating order. And finally, speakers will have 1 minute each for a closing statement. Our timer, Charlene, will pop up on her screen to let you know when you have 30 seconds left, and when your time is up, she'll display a stop sign. So I suggest our participants use the Zoom gallery view so you can be sure you see her. So let's proceed. The ballot question, I'll quote for Sacramento County Measure A: to fix potholes and repair damaged streets, provide safe routes to school, expand affordable senior and disabled transit services, eliminate bottlenecks and improve emergency response times, reduce traffic congestion, and improve air quality. Shall the measure approving the Sacramento County Transportation Maintenance, Safety, and Congestion Relief Act of 2022 Retail Transactions and Use Tax Initiative, including a 40-year half-cent sales tax, raising an estimated $212,512,500 annually for transportation and transit projects, be adopted. We will begin with the opening statement from Andy Russell in support of Measure A. Andy?
Thank you very much, Steve. And thank you to the members of the National Women's Political Caucus of Sacramento for having me on your educational forum this evening. My name is Andy Russell. I'm a young Democrat from the city of Sacramento, work for the California Alliance for Jobs, and I'm here to speak in favor of Measure A, the Sacramento County Transportation Maintenance, Safety, and Congestion Relief Act of 2022. Like Steve said, Measure A provides the adoption of a retail transaction and use tax of 0.5% for local transportation purposes. This is our chance. It's time to reverse the trend of our decaying transportation infrastructure. For years, Sacramentans have been facing increasing commute times, worsening congestion, and declining air quality. But this November, voters will have an opportunity to support change. To improve our local economy and quality of life, we must have a safe, reliable, and fully funded transportation system. Measure A provides a blueprint for transforming our transportation system in the decades ahead and enables the county to leverage billions of dollars from the federal and state government to help us achieve our aggressive climate goals. Included in this Measure A are projects of regional significance, like a light rail extension to the airport, new bridges across the Sacramento and American rivers, a fix-it-first approach to improve the safety, access, and mobility of our streets, roads, and highways, and millions of dollars for maintenance, rehab, and habitat preservation along the American River Parkway. This measure also creates a significant expansion of our transit system, improving connectivity and providing better mobility for students and seniors. This means a safer, cleaner, more frequent, and reliable and affordable transportation system. A transit system that helps ease our reliance on single occupancy vehicles, reducing greenhouse gases, and improving our air quality. Speaking of air quality, improving the county's transportation system will create significant progress towards improving our air. Less congestion will reduce transportation-related emissions, and an increased ridership on regional transit will add to the positive impact this measure will have on the air we breathe. Additionally, the measure allocates more than $177 million into essential air quality measures, including monitoring, emissions reduction, and future mobility programs that promote clean air, mitigate climate change, respond to wildfire smoke, and achieve and maintain health-based air quality standards and low carbon development goals. Building these improvements to Sacramento's transportation system will create tens of thousands of family-supporting union jobs. Passing this measure will mean a stronger middle class and access to better quality of life for our local workers. This is why the major unions, all the major unions in Sacramento, including the Sacramento Central Labor Council, support Measure A. So I'll stop there.
All right. Thank you, Andy. Barbara, you now have 3 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Barbara Leary, chair of the Sacramento group of the Sierra Club. The club has long sought to push for smart growth, affordable housing, public transit, and equity. We are working with a diverse grassroots group of citizens who oppose Measure A. Our allies are multiple environmental groups, environmental justice communities, equity groups, transit riders, and taxpayers. Measure A Not Okay group represents our actual community. We are not funded by corporations or special interests who paid $1.7 million to collect signatures to put this measure on the ballot. Measure A is a short-sighted gamble on the region's future put together and bankrolled by land speculators who want to build new roads and highways with your tax dollars, enabling them to profit by developing cheap land away from our cities, jobs, and services. The primary focus of this measure is to build new roads and interchanges through undeveloped natural and working lands, drastically altering the land use plan already in place for the region so they can build more sprawl. It is not a citizen's measure. The measure ignores climate change. This is a play on undermining long-standing land use plans throughout the county, substantially counteracting decades of safe transportation and land use planning done by the Sacramento area coalition of governments. It will destroy natural and working lands. Think about our local farms. Bring in more cars and traffic. Think LA. And worsen already terrible air quality and water shortages. Poor air quality and water shortages will hit vulnerable and minority communities the hardest in terms of health problems and financial stress. Contrary to the proponents' greenwashing, the Sacramento Area Council of Governments concluded that if the projects are built, the region will likely not meet state and federally mandated GHG reduction goals and compromise the ability of the entire region and RT to compete for future state and federal housing and transportation funding. It's an unfair 40-year regressive tax on top of the half-cent sales tax we began paying in 2009, which runs through 2039, that was intended to help improve our roadways and transportation. It's going to hit our lower and middle income families and seniors the hardest. We're all already being crushed by inflation. This measure is inequitable on all fronts.
All right, thank you, Barbara. We'll now turn to the questions. My first question goes to Andy from the pro side. Andy, according to the American Lung Association, Sacramento ranks as one of America's top 10 most polluted cities because of poor air quality. How would Measure A improve the region's air quality and or address climate change?
Thanks so much for that question, Steve. Air quality is super important to me as a Sacramentan, as someone who lives in the Valley. I spoke a little bit about this in my opening statement, but I'll just reiterate that there's $177 million in this expenditure plan for air quality. That includes essential air quality measures, monitoring, emissions reduction, and future programs to mitigate climate change, promote clean air, and respond to wildfire smoke. This measure includes air quality standards and follows the master planning SCS document. So if a project doesn't conform to these air standards, it has to then mitigate them. So that's in an agreement with SACOG and an agreement with STA. So that's in law. This project does not worsen. This measure does not worsen our air quality. In fact, it will enhance our air quality.
Thank you, Andy. Barbara, in your view, how would Measure A improve or not the region's air quality and or address climate change?
We wholeheartedly disagree that this will improve the air quality in our region. One of the projects includes the Southeast Connector going from Folsom to Elk Grove, opens up that area for further development and further traffic. Another project proposed is to add another bridge over the American River. Both of these projects, and I can name a few others, but we'll run out of time, will increase traffic and reduce people actually using regional transit to get around communities that are already existing. The fact that they will also be removing lands that are critical for carbon sequestration, pulling carbon out of the air and adding more homes and roads actually exacerbates the problem of air quality. We have some of the worst air quality in the country. We rank anywhere between number 6 and 8 on the bad air quality for the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. The next question, we'll start with you. How will Measure A affect land use patterns in the county positively or negatively?
Taking natural and working lands and converting them to sprawl is really what the goal of this measure is. We need projects in infill where people are already living. We need projects that will improve the public transit system for existing residents. We need projects that will enhance deteriorating communities in our region. And this measure does not fully serve them as best it could. If you take away some of these sprawl projects that will be enhanced by this, we would have a good measure, but we don't have that. We have a measure that is going to focus on undermining years of Sacramento Area Council of Government planning for a safe, viable community and transportation.
All right, thank you. Andy, how do you view the effects on land use patterns from the measure?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Steve. This is a transportation measure. This measure does rehabilitate our roads with a fix-it-first approach. This measure doesn't induce sprawl to our county. This measure, the Southeast Connector, is a road that is one of the most dangerous roads in Sacramento. People are already driving down that road at a pretty high rate and a high rate of speed. It's very unsafe. People die on this road every year. And so, it needs to be fixed. It needs to be rehabilitated, and it needs to be helped. And if that's the major contention, that this measure induces sprawl, that's just simply not true. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. Next question is to you first, Andy. Despite rising gas prices, poor air quality, the threat of climate change and traffic congestion, Sacramentans continue to use their cars while bus and train trips have not significantly increased. How would Measure A reduce car trips and increase transit trips?
Thanks for that question, Steve. Measure A represents an expansive build out of our transit system. Our transit system recently got an award for the most improved transit system in the nation. And we're looking to build upon that by giving them the funds they need to expand transit mobility and expand transit for all portions of this county, for all socioeconomic groups, for all ages. We need better transit to get people out of our cars and reduce their reliance on single occupancy vehicles. That's a fact. We need to do that. So, the best way to do that is to expand our transit system. And that's what this does. It pours more money into our transit system than ever before. And it capitalizes on the investments from our federal government, President Biden has made it a major priority of his to expand rail. And that's what this measure does. It allows us to really capitalize on federal priorities for our transportation system here locally.
All right, thank you. Barbara?
We don't disagree that public transit needs improvement in our region. It certainly does. People will use public transit if it is designed to be accessible and affordable. This measure will increase the kind of sprawl development, even though that's not recognized by the proponents, that will actually contribute to more trips. There is not a major need for people to commute between Folsom and Elk Grove. That land out there is proposed for future development. You can see signs all along that road. In the path of future development, that line will definitely increase sprawl and increase vehicle miles traveled in our region. So yes, we would love to support a measure that focused on public transit in our existing neighborhoods to our existing jobs and services. We are not thinking that we should be including projects in this measure that are going to induce sprawl and make it harder for people to get around.
All right, thank you. Next question for Andy first. Measure A says its highest priority is fixing, repaving county streets and roads, but $300 million are allocated to the Southeast Connector Expressway connecting Highways 50, 99, and Interstate 5. Although its stated purpose is congestion relief, it could jumpstart new greenfield development that would add more traffic, which is why SACOG has thus far refused to include the connector in the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Why is building the Southeast Connector such a high priority for your supporters of this citizens measure, and in particular for the California Alliance for Jobs, Cordova Hills Development, and Angelos Tsakopoulos and affiliate entities?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question, Steve. The Capital Southeast Connector, like you said, is not included in the MTP's SCS, the master planning document of the county. To be included, it has to prove that it can mitigate all its negative effects. Okay, so also, like you said, the Southeast Connector is earmarked for $300 million. That represents about 3% of the total plan. So, 3% of this total plan our opponents vehemently disagree with. And that's a disagreement, okay? But this road does need to be fixed. It is, like I said, one of the most dangerous road in Sacramento. People are already driving along it. This measure doesn't build housing out there. 2.6, or the county's estimated to grow by 600,000 people. I'd like to see them infill development. I'd like to see them with transit options so we can go after those transit-oriented development dollars. And that's what I'll say.
All right. Thank you. Barbara, why do you think the connector is such a high priority?
Well, I don't see any reason that the developers that own and are invested in a lot of the land where that is going to go put this on the ballot and spent $1.7 million to get it there if that wasn't one of their big priorities. Of course, a lot of these other pieces are needed. We're very supportive of Fix It First. This is not a citizen's measure. That is not true. If you pay people for a signature to put something on the ballot, it is not something that was necessarily done voluntarily, and people aren't told by those signature collectors the truth of the matter. There are no dollars in this bill for mitigation throughout the region. Those dollars would require matching funds that we will lose if we do not meet the greenhouse gas reduction goals in the region, which we don't anticipate will happen based on studies done by the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. That's why they haven't approved it all these years.
All right. Thank you, Barbara. Next question to you, following up on your last point. Measure A says it will provide the local financial match to ensure Sacramento gets hundreds of millions of additional state and federal dollars to fix our roads and upgrade local transit. You referenced the SACOG study, the SACOG being the agency that oversees regional transportation funding, indicating that the measure's funding of new road capacity projects could put SAC-RT at risk of becoming less competitive for state and federal matching funds, which increasingly favor projects that reduce vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions. How do you address this potential conflict?
It's difficult to address that conflict when we have people stating that this is going to make it better by building more roads, and it's clearly going to increase the number of vehicle miles traveled. People will choose to drive a car in this region in already developed areas of sprawl because it's not that easy to get around. A measure that would focus on enhancing regional transit to make it easier to use would be the best possible solution here. We want to see jobs in our area. We want to see better public transit. We want to see Fix It First projects. What we object to is the destruction of an area along the American River to increase traffic across that area. In the south area, where increased traffic is not necessarily needed unless something else is built out there. And we, again, oppose this regressive tax.
All right, thank you. Andy, how do you address that potential conflict?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Steve. So in this SACOG study, it says that our transportation expenditure plan for Measure A will reduce greenhouse gases by per capita by 17%. Reduces greenhouse gases by 17%. Our goal for the entire region of Sacramento, not just the county, is 19%. So by reducing our emissions by 17%, that's what this plan does. We're missing out on those 2%. And that we feel has to be brought up, that 2% has to be taken up by our neighboring counties that are within the SACOG region, okay? So this plan is an environmental plan. It gets 17%, it cuts emissions by 17%, and it does great work to improve our air quality in the region.
Thank you, Andy. Next question, back to you. Following up on your point, in response to some of the criticism about the road capacity issue and greenhouse gas compliance, the supporters of Measure A helped broker a compromise agreement with STA, the Sacramento Transportation Authority, and SACOG to address these issues. In your view, under the agreement, what would happen if SACOG determined a project such as the Southeast Connector would increase greenhouse gas emissions and does not include the project in the MTP or Metropolitan Transportation Plan?
That's a great question, Stephen. I'm not 100% familiar with the internal planning process at SACOG, but what I've been told is that if a project doesn't meet the air quality goals, it doesn't get included in the master planning document, the MTP SCS. That's what I've been told. So, that depends on the internal process at SACOG and whether they find a capacity project to not be within the county or the region's goals. So,
all right. Barbara?
I actually question the numbers that were quoted about SACOG saying that these projects would reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 17%. Otherwise, it would be hard to believe that they are noting that if projects such as Southeast Connector are built, that we would exceed our greenhouse gas emissions and not actually qualify for federal or state matching funds for other projects in the region.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Next question goes back to Barbara. Do you believe in general that a countywide sales tax is the best way to provide new source of local funding for transportation in Sacramento?
As I noted earlier, we're already paying a 0.5-cent sales tax that began in 2009 for road improvements and transportation improvements. It runs until 2039. So we're being asked to add another 0.5 cent to provide for more funding. I think this is really hard to put on the backs of hardworking residents in our region without an assurance that this money will actually be used for projects in their neighborhoods. It's, again, as I said, a regressive tax. It applies to everybody. The tax in the city of Folsom, Rancho Cordova, and actually it's Folsom and Elk Grove will go to 8.25%. It will go to, in Sacramento City and Rancho Cordova, it will go 9.25%. I don't think it's fair to ask our residents to pay another $1 on every 10 or $10 on every 100 for projects that may or may not benefit them.
All right, Andy, do you believe the countywide sales tax is the best way to provide new transportation funding?
I absolutely do. This is how the largest cities in our state fund their robust transportation networks, and how they get funding that Sacramento, if we had a better transportation network, we could apply for. So, and I just want to speak that Measure C is a regressive tax. It's not a property tax. So visitors who work or shop in our county and utilize our transportation system would also have to pay for the transportation benefits delivered by Measure A. And so local residents don't shoulder the entire burden. And by law, essential purchases like groceries and medicine are also exempt. But like I said, this is how the best cities, 88% of the population in California funds their transportation needs, is through a transportation sales tax. We need it in this county. The funds are dwindling very, very fast, and we need to capitalize on this prioritization of transportation by the federal government, by our president.
All right. Well, thank you both for your answers to these questions. And at this time, it's time for our closing. Each of you will have 1 minute, and we'll start with Andy.
Got it. Well, thanks again, Steve, for those tough questions. And thanks for having me on tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about Measure A. So lastly, not passing this measure, I think, would be catastrophic for our regional air quality and greenhouse gas reduction goals. Like I said, the SACOG study In that study, we were just 2 points shy of meeting our region's GHG goals. And it's a reasonable assumption that the neighboring 5 counties in our region can come up with that remaining 2%. Measure A represents an enormous opportunity for our region to bring much needed resources to our transportation system. Sacramentans have waited too long for complete streets, safe routes to school, and to be free from congestion and the better health outcomes that come along with them. It's Sacramento's turn for improved infrastructure and a transportation system that supercharges the movement of people and goods in this county. Bottom line is Sacramentans deserve Measure A, and I hope that all of you will support it in November.
All right. Thank you, Andy. Barbara, you have 1 minute for your closing.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here this evening. I urge voters of Sacramento County to vote no on Measure A. Our residents deserve better options when we are spending money, buying goods, and trying to keep our households going and pay for gas in our cars and pay for light rail than another sales tax measure that is not going to directly benefit all our existing communities in a more direct and sustainable manner. We are falling far behind, as was noted in the last thing, on providing affordable housing. If we're going to spend more dollars, it needs to go to infill projects and assisting our communities in redevelopment and rebuilding. This measure makes no sense. I actually have a 2-week-old grandson, and for him to be burdened with a 40-year sales tax, he'll be 40 years old by the time this thing is paid off. We're already paying one off in 30, at the end of 2039. So please vote no. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you to both Andy Russell and Barbara Leary for participating. And a big thanks to National Women's Political Caucus Sacramento for hosting, and Maria for your technical help that made this Zoom forum possible.